Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome to The Mind of Lorgar Aurelian. This will not be a full Primarch video, like what I did with Conrad Curse, but it will be something akin to it, where we will be examining the actions, the justifications, and the reasonings behind Lorgar's choices, how he seems to view the world, and also how he attempts to portray his view of the world to others. For they are often not the same thing. Lorgar is a character that is forever attempting to justify his own actions, which he seems to understand as wrong, as evil perhaps even, but also a character who seems to have no inclination of ever choosing another path. For Lorgar is both utterly assured of the righteousness of his cause, and yet simultaneously terrified of what he convinces himself he must do in its name. And it is precisely because of those actions that in all of the 40k universe, a universe dominated by the idea that there is no such thing as good or evil, only shades of grey, Lorgar is unquestionably the closest thing to real evil in that universe. Yes, even more so than the Chaos Gods themselves. Simple instinct drives their wickedness. They are no more evil for spreading and protecting their domain than men are evil for bulldozing an anthill to make way for a house. Their perspective on things and simple existence itself is so different from ours, so utterly alien, that words and concepts such as good and evil lose what little meaning they had in the first place. But this is not the case for Lorgar. When Lorgar sends his sons to torture and death for no other reason than to satisfy his curiosity, he cannot claim he doesn't understand, or did not fully appreciate the gravity of the situation, or the effect that his actions would have. He was told very clearly and precisely what the effect of his actions would be. He spent 3 days talking to the very same demon who smilingly told him precisely what he would do to his word-bearers. Lorgar knew what he was doing. Indeed, it was partially because he knew so well that the sacrifice held real value to the Chaos Gods. After all, a sacrifice of something that holds no meaning or value to the person making it, well, that is hardly a sacrifice at all. Oh, and Lorgar will be ever so sad about it. He will cry and gnash his teeth, lamenting to the high heavens that he must do these things, that he must make this sacrifice. But then, without anyone forcing him, without any other influence than his own, he will make the sacrifice regardless. And that is what makes Lorgar truly evil. Being fully cognizant of the consequences of his actions, knowing full well the suffering and anguish it will cause, and yet still choosing to do so. That is what makes Lorgar Aurelian a monster. But to understand why the most human of all the Primarchs could fall to such an abysmal low, we need to have a closer look at Lorgar's ideas, his philosophy, and most importantly, his actions, which frequently contradict his ever so pretty words. So let's begin with some of those words. One of Lorgar's most famous quotes: "If a man gathers 10,000 suns in his hands, if a man seeds 10,000 worlds with his sons and daughters, granting them custody of the galaxy itself, if a man guides 1,000,000 vessels through the infinite stars with a mere thought, then I pray you tell me, if you are able, how such a man is anything less than a god." This quote is probably the single most important point of reference we have when it comes to the way Lorgar views the world, and how he rationalizes his decisions and belief, or more importantly, his faith. Because in reality, Lorgar is not truly a religious man. Now that may sound preposterous, but think on it for a moment. what is it that Lorgar actually worships? Why is the Emperor God in his eyes? Power. Nothing more, nothing less. The question Lorgar presents in his quote is essentially, if a man can do all these things, what is he, if not a god? In all due reality, this boils down to nothing more than might makes right. But Lorgar takes it one step further. Might makes divine. The Emperor has the might to send 1,000,000 vessels through the infinite stars. He has the might to claim 1,000 worlds and seed them with his sons and daughters. And because the Emperor has that might, the Emperor is divine. And Lorgar knows that there is no such thing as a god in the traditional sense. He even flat out says so himself, but he uses that idea as an excuse, something to hide behind. By stating that his horrible actions were mandated by God, he absolves himself of all responsibility, despite the fact that he himself knows and states that there is no such thing as God. But why then does he use these words? Faith, religion, God. To understand that, we need to take a look at another example, Monarchia, and its destruction at the hands of the 13th Legion. When Monarchia, his perfect city, was destroyed, Lorgar is confused and angry. He shouted that he does not understand why it was destroyed, and asks if Guilliman has gone mad to do so. And when a genuinely baffled Malkador explains that Monarchia was destroyed because the planet was not compliant, as they were openly flaunting imperial law by worshipping the Emperor, Lorgar not only does not understand why this was a reason to destroy the city, he even asks Malkador why he is arguing his case for him. So how does Lorgar come to this conclusion? The Imperium has openly and clearly banned any and all forms of organized worship, and the Emperor has categorically gone to great lengths to deny any claims that he is divine. Well, it is because in Lorgar's mind, what the populace of Monarchia was doing is not worship at all. It is loyalty. Indeed, it is the highest form of loyalty. And so, of course, the planet was compliant. There could be no doubt to that. It appears that Lorgar differentiates between worship of a god in the traditional sense from his version of worship. He has redefined the term in the context of worshipping a real living entity and its power. Thusly, Lorgar's worship is loyalty, and does not break with any of the Imperium's laws because it is not worship in a religious sense. This interpretation, however, does not seem to fly with Malkador, or Guilliman, or really anyone else outside of Lorgar's own legion. And the humiliation culminates in the Emperor himself coming down to the planet and personally rejecting Lorgar's worship like he had every other offer of worship so far. And so after his chastisement, Lorgar has lost his reason, his justification for his actions up until that point, his war on cultures, his conquests in the Imperium's name, and his indoctrination of millions, possibly billions, into what is now shown to be a false faith. He can no longer find a reason within his current belief, as the Emperor has rejected his faith, leaving Lorgar, and Lorgar alone, responsible for all of these actions that he now finds repulsive. Seeking to figure things out, he withdraws from the Word-Bearers, seeking only the counsel of Erebus and his adoptive father Corferon. But unfortunately, the two see this as a cynical opportunity to realign Lorgar onto a new path, their path. And Lorgar, desperate for something to cling to, is easily persuaded. The conclusion the three reach is that yes, they were indeed correct all along. The Emperor is divine, but merely being divine does not make one worthy of worship. Previously, Lorgar worshipped the Emperor because he was divine, and from the divine comes faith. And in Lorgar's view, faith and faith alone can save humanity as a unifying force. But now that his god has rejected him, Lorgar rearranges cause and consequence. No longer does faith flow from the divine, instead now, the divine stems from worship and faith. And so a true god must first and foremost be willing to be worshipped, because faith, in and of itself, is now more important than the god. But even with this redefined point of view, a church without a god is no church at all, and a priest without a gospel is no priest. Lorgar still needed a deity, both to inspire worship and also to have an entity to place above himself, a higher purpose to absolve him of sin. Lorgar himself denies this, of course. He tells Magnus that he is certainly not looking for a god just to place him above himself. But his actions say otherwise. He was entirely fine with waging his wars and indoctrinating billions as long as it was for the Emperor, and only when he could no longer use the Emperor as a reason to do so did he become distressed. Only then did he begin to doubt the validity of his actions. And we see this in how he seeks solace from his adopted father, Corferon, who says to Lorgar that "You are not like your brothers. You could never commit cruelty with a smile like they can." But frankly, this sentence is so wildly inaccurate it is little more than a joke, one I use repeatedly in the Horus Heresy lore breakdown video of the first heretic, precisely because Lorgar keeps doing horrible shit and seemingly not feeling particularly bad about it. Lorgar will go on to commit countless atrocities in his search for a new god. He will massacre entire worlds, send his own sons to death and torture, and condone human sacrifice. He will even butcher those who ultimately showed him the truth, simply because he cannot afford anyone else to learn what he has learned. Lorgar may tell himself that he did not smile as he ordered the planet of Cadia cleansed of all life. He may tell himself that he only does this in the name of the truth. But the fact still remains that it was not God who did all of this. It was Lorgar. And make no mistake, Lorgar would never have chosen differently. For just like a priest without a gospel, a faith without religion is no faith at all. Lorgar says that the reason why humanity needs faith is simply because it is for humanity's own good. That faith is an unrivaled unifying force, and that only it can grant humanity the unity it needs to withstand the predation of the Xenos. For the sake of argument, let's simply assume this preposterous statement to be true. What part of this requires a religious aspect to the faith? That may sound like a strange question, but humanity already has a gospel, a unifying force that binds it together in a uniform whole that shall not be questioned. It is the imperial truth. Faith does not have to be religious. One can have faith in a person, in an ideal, in a set of beliefs, or an overriding philosophy. So why did Lorgar not even consider these options? If what he truly wants was mere unity, then any of a whole host of options should have been available to him. And yet, these things were never options to Lorgar. Lorgar needs something above himself. In the case of faith in an ideal, the person is placed above the ideal, for the person is the one who develops and maintains the ideal. He is the one that chooses to follow it, and the idea of that ideal will inevitably change as time passes. What was once considered completely unacceptable may be utterly normal one day, and vice versa. In the case of faith in the divine, however, the person is by definition placed below the divine. The divine is distinct and separate from humanity, and therefore the person. Even the most exalted of individuals could never hope to compare to the gods, after all. And unlike ideas of philosophy, the gods are rigid and fixed in their value. It is whatever the god says it is, and they will always be gods. Therefore, they will always be absolute, and they will always be above the person. And this is vitally important to Lorgar, for what he wants more than anything else is something to blame for his actions. Something to allow him to continue to claim that he is still innocent. That he could never commit cruelties with a smile on his face, no matter how much blood he is drowning in. Everything else is nothing more than yet another excuse. Yet more justification. He claims to have hated the Emperor for forcing him to be just a soldier, when he wished to be a poet and a visionary, someone who strives for a better tomorrow, and yet now he marches alongside the Chaos Gods. Hardly great patrons of the poetic arts, and they also have no use whatsoever for a better tomorrow for humanity. Indeed, they seem to offer humanity very little at all. So how does Lorgar justify this? How does Lorgar justify choosing the Chaos Gods over humanity, without admitting that he is only doing so for something else to blame? Well, we have already debunked any notion that he is doing this purely to unify humanity under a common banner, which leaves the Chaos Gods' own claim, namely that without the unity provided by faith in them, humanity will perish under alien claws. But this does not seem to be a reasonable conclusion. In Lorgar's time, when he is told this, the Imperium seems unstoppable, crushing every major threat before it and conquering vast swathes of the galaxy. The Imperium is undoubtedly in the ascendance, and no power in the galaxy seems able to slow, and much less stop, that meteoric rise to dominance over the entire galaxy. And this only ever becomes more true as time passes. The Imperium continues to destroy any and all resistance, and with the final breaking of the Orc menace on Ulanor, the Imperium's hegemony of the galaxy appears to be utterly unquestionable. And so it seems ludicrous for Lorgar to take this in good faith. There seems to be no reason why he would ever believe a demonic creature, a Xenos life form in his own right, that humanity will be crushed beneath the weight of invaders if it does not break itself apart in a civil war. The only way this could possibly make any sense is if Lorgar is essentially using author knowledge and assuming that something like the Tyranid menace will eventually appear, a menace that itself only arrived in the galaxy through the actions of the Horus Heresy. And this really is the key point. No reasonable mind in the 30k universe at that point in time would ever believe such a seemingly ludicrous statement that the Imperium would be torn apart by the Xenos. It would be like suggesting that, ooh, better worship Satan, or the US is gonna get invaded by Zimbabwe. In other words, Lorgar did not reason himself into believing this. He believed it because he needed to believe it. And we know he needed it. Desperately. There was nothing else Lorgar had ever wanted more than to believe. The Chaos Gods did not pull their punches. They did not try to obfuscate or lie as they did with Horus. They simply showed him the blood-soaked, horrifying future they had chosen to pursue. Emphasis on the future they had chosen, for it is ever fickle, as the end of Argel Tal demonstrated. And after seeing the ruination he would cause, after seeing the tides of blood he would spill, and the fate that would befall Magnus's legion, his most beloved brother, he still chooses faith and chaos. Not for humanity, not for any greater goal or lofty ideals, but simply because he wanted to do so. We've already talked about the ludicrous justification that humanity would fall without the aid of the Chaos Gods. Let us talk about the second one as well. Lorgar's supposed reasoning for choosing chaos, no matter how horrible it may be. Even he himself says that he did not wish for the truth to be this. He would have wanted the truth to be anything but this, but it is nevertheless the truth, and so he must pursue it. But does even that justification hold up under scrutiny? Let us even ignore for a moment that the truth is a very malleable concept. The Chaos Gods themselves have chosen several different variations of truth to those they wish to seduce. Horus was given one version of the truth, leaving out a few key details. Lorgar has been given yet another version of the truth, and Magnus was given yet a third. But let us, as mentioned, ignore the truthfulness of the truth, and instead focus upon the supposed value of this truth and how it fits in, or more correctly, does not fit in, with Lorgar's supposed goal of simply unifying humanity. Because as he says again and again, he is not a soldier, he is not a warrior, he is a poet and a visionary, and all he wants is for a better tomorrow. Well, even if we were to accept that faith was an unrivaled unifying factor, which human history would seem to dispute quite vehemently, then how unifying would this faith truly be? A faith almost entirely predicated on might makes right, where the strong not only can, but will be actively encouraged to take anything and everything they want from the weak, in which humanity will be subject to beings who quite literally grow stronger and more intelligent, specifically from the suffering of living beings. And of course, that is merely the tip of the iceberg. We are looking for unity and stability from a religion whose core tenets is death, disease, murder, chaos, change, and excess. That doesn't sound like a winning formula. And again, it's not like this is being kept as any form of secret from Lorgar. Lorgar witnessed Ingethel, his advisory demon, being born by ripping its way out from the flesh of a Cadian woman. He spoke with this demon for 3 days. The very same demon that not only asked Lorgar to sacrifice his sons, but also who promised him that he would show them death and torture. The only possible conclusion that we can reasonably draw from this is that Lorgar never cared about those other things. He never cared about unification. He never cared about humanity, or the ideas of poetry, or vision, or how he would like to be anything but a soldier. None of these things were ever truly important to Lorgar. All he ever wanted was for something to worship. Something to make him feel better about the crimes he would not only commit, but that deep down I think he himself knew that he wanted to commit. For surely no sane man could stare into the depths of hell and be utterly convinced of its reality, and then decide that they wanted to take part in spreading that hell. That kind of a decision requires a very special kind of a mindset. The very same that might see someone sacrifice the lives of millions in order to summon the ruin storm so as to gain a strategic advantage in war. I wonder what Lorgar the poet and the visionary would have to say to Lorgar the Chaos Warlord, if those aspects of Lorgar ever even existed in the first place. And lastly, let us talk about Lorgar's supposed regret. As the trap of Istvan was closing around the loyalist legions, Lorgar professed that he did not want this, that he would never have wanted this. And he even suggests that he was not the one who planned this all, that he was not the one who set it all up. Apparently, it is suggested quite heavily so that it was Corferon and Erebus that set everything up, that laid the trap, made the plans, and got the other legions to betray the Emperor. To a certain degree, I am sure that there is a core of truth in this. Corferon and Erebus have long been plotting to raise themselves in the estimation of their chaotic masters. But the idea that Lorgar is innocent of this, well, I remind you, Lorgar never wanted any of this. Lorgar just wanted to be a poet, a scholar, a visionary. Lorgar just wanted what is best for humanity. Lorgar just wanted faith for the sake of unity. All lies. Why should we think that he is not lying now? Why should we not assume that this is merely another facet of Lorgar's guilty conscience, another crime that he wishes to move from his own shoulders and onto those of others? It would not be the first time Lorgar had done so, and he certainly has a history that suggests he would have no problems doing so again. And at least to my ears, his sudden regret of all the things he chose to do, of all the things he pushed to have happen, sounds mighty hollow indeed. And there you have it. The mind of Lorgar Aurelian. A place filled with contradictions, obfuscation, lies, and flat-out self-deceit. Lorgar takes great pride in his supposed inability to commit acts of wanton cruelty with a smile on his face, unlike his brothers. But also, unlike his brothers, he was the only one to turn to chaos entirely of his own volition. He was the only one who chose this destiny for humanity, and so he has more blood and cruelty on his conscience than all the other Primarchs combined. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Until then, have a good day.